The night air in downtown Los Angeles buzzed with a strange electricity. Crowds surged around the federal courthouse like a tide, some shouting slogans, others holding up signs with Diddy's face scrawled across them in defiance or adoration. Police kept a tight perimeter, but tension was thick in the air. Reporters barked live updates into microphones. No one noticed the black SUV that slid quietly into the underground garage. Inside it sat Margot Robbie, silent, pale, and clutching a small object in her palm as if it might vanish if she let go. The flash drive was warm from her grip, its plastic casing ordinary, yet inside it held the kind of footage that could fracture the image of a global icon and send seismic waves through the entertainment industry. She hadn't slept in 2 days. The memories still clawed at her. Dim lights, muffled music, shadows moving behind closed doors. She hadn't known what she was walking into that night. She'd believed it was another industry party, one of many. But what she witnessed, what had been captured without consent, haunted her. When Agent Travis Cole stepped into the car, he didn't speak right away. Tall, composed, his presence carried the kind of gravity that made people confess before he asked a question. He simply looked at her, his eyes calm but expectant. She handed him the flash drive. "This can't be traced to me," she said quietly, but there was no conviction in her voice. Cole nodded once, slipping the drive into his inner coat pocket. "You understand the implications?" "I do," she whispered. Outside, the noise of the city continued unabated, but inside that car the world had just shifted. If you're hooked already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next in this explosive story. 4 blocks away, Dahlia Moore adjusted her camera lens from across the cafe. She wasn't paparazzi, not exactly. Her stories didn't end up in tabloids. They hit front pages, exposés, the kind of articles that ended careers and moved stock prices. And right now her instincts told her Margot was the crack in the dam. She picked up her phone and tapped out a quick voice memo. "Margot Robbie, Federal Building, high probability of whistleblower activity. Track her movements. Find the angle." Inside the FBI field office, Agent Cole locked the flash drive in an evidence vault. He hadn't looked at the files yet, but he didn't need to. The fear in Margot's eyes was enough. He'd seen that look before, on victims, on witnesses too afraid to speak aloud what they'd seen. But this wasn't just about fear. This was about power. Diddy's trial was already one of the most closely watched proceedings in years. Accusations of illicit parties, violence, and coercion had swirled for months. But so far, everything was circumstantial. Rumors. Testimonies too fragile to hold under legal scrutiny. What Cole now possessed could change that. Margot walked into her publicist's office the next morning, greeted by a dozen missed calls and 2 security men stationed outside. Her team was in chaos. Photos of her SUV at the courthouse had already hit social media. The hashtags were spreading: Margot knows, Diddy trial, Hollywood silence. Her publicist exploded the moment she stepped in. "Tell me you didn't give them anything." Margot didn't answer. She simply sat down, stared at the wall, and said, "It's already done." Outside, another protest had begun, but inside certain rooms where evidence was reviewed, stories were written, and decisions were made, a different kind of storm was brewing. And Margot Robbie had just lit the match. The fallout was instant. Within hours of her meeting with Agent Cole, Margot Robbie's name was trending worldwide. Paparazzi swarmed her gated community, helicopters buzzed overhead, and anonymous messages began flooding her inbox, some begging for truth, others laced with threats. She stayed inside, blinds drawn, ignoring calls from producers, studios, and friends who suddenly didn't know where they stood. The decision to hand over the flash drive wasn't impulsive, but the consequences were more immediate than she had prepared for. Across the city, in a secure FBI analysis room, Agent Cole sat in front of a monitor, headphones on, watching what the drive revealed. There was no introductory screen, no timestamp, just footage, uncut, raw. The quality wasn't professional, but it was clear enough to identify faces, dozens of them. A sprawling mansion, loud music, laughter, but beneath the surface, something sinister pulsed. The camera drifted through hallways, revealing guests in states of vulnerability. A handful of known actors, musicians, even a sitting senator. Then the camera turned again. Private rooms, doors closing, arguments, crying. Something heavy shifted in Cole's chest. He paused the video, rewound, played it again. His jaw clenched. He recognized Diddy's voice. Heard him giving instructions, then laughing as someone protested. There were implications. Nothing yet explicitly illegal, but enough to prove predatory behavior. Enough to shatter reputations, enough to ignite a firestorm. Back at Margot's home, her legal team gathered in hushed urgency. Her attorney, Beth Linwood, paced in front of the windows. "You have no immunity," Beth snapped. "If this gets out and you're linked to it, they'll come after you for leaking classified evidence, obstruction, defamation. Take your pick." "I didn't leak anything," Margot replied flatly. "I gave it to law enforcement." "But you're a celebrity," Beth said. "Which means they'll make an example out of you, whether it's your fault or not." Margot didn't flinch. She had already made peace with the cost. Meanwhile, the footage hadn't reached the courtroom yet, but rumors were already circulating. Journalists whispered of a mystery source tied to the investigation. Online sleuths dissected every second of the latest paparazzi clips. One freeze frame of Margot exiting the SUV had become the centerpiece of a dozen conspiracy threads. At her desk in a modest downtown newsroom, Dahlia Moore scrolled through Reddit and Twitter, piecing the clues together. She wasn't convinced this was just about Margot. No, this was part of something larger, something buried deep in Hollywood's glossy exterior. The kind of truth that ruins empires. She opened a secure browser and searched names of others linked to Diddy's inner circle. Some had vanished from the spotlight recently. Others had issued oddly timed apologies or disappeared entirely. The pattern was there, just beneath the surface. She clicked open a blank document and typed, "New lead, Margot Robbie involved in federal probe. Source claims footage exposes criminal operations tied to Diddy's private events. Industry cover-up likely. Must confirm." In Diddy's legal office, the mood was different. Damon Reyes, lead defense attorney, stood before a wall of photos and timelines. "We have to shut this down," he told his team. "Now." He made a call. Within minutes, a cease and desist letter was prepared and sent to several media outlets. A legal motion followed, demanding the FBI halt any action related to new evidence until its chain of custody could be verified. It was a stalling tactic, but an effective one. That night, Margot received a hand-delivered letter warning her of pending litigation if her name appeared in conjunction with the footage. Her hands trembled as she held it. Outside, her security lights flickered. Inside, she sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the number for Agent Cole. The silence was thick, and she wasn't sure if she'd survive what came next. By the next morning, it was no longer a rumor. A leak from within the bureau had confirmed what the internet had only guessed. The footage on the flash drive was authentic. Screenshots were circulating. Faces pixelated, voices muffled, but it didn't matter. The media had a taste of blood and they weren't letting go. Margot Robbie's name was splashed across every front page, paired with terms like whistleblower, insider, and Hollywood's brave defector. She hadn't made a statement. Her team hadn't confirmed a thing, but the silence only fed the speculation. It didn't take long for the court to respond. Within hours, she was issued a subpoena to appear at a closed-door hearing regarding the footage's legitimacy and acquisition. Her legal team scrambled again, preparing for the inevitable storm. She sat quietly through it all, drinking coffee she couldn't taste and trying to ignore the throb behind her eyes. Then came the smear campaign. Old tabloid stories resurfaced, wild nights, misquoted interviews, shaky photos from a decade ago. Online bots flooded her pages. Fake DMs circulated, suggesting she had ulterior motives or vendettas. Talk show panels argued over whether she was unstable, attention-hungry, or both. But she didn't bend. Meanwhile, Dahlia Moore followed her own trail. One of her longtime contacts, a stylist with connections to multiple A-listers, reached out anonymously. They had been at the same party. They had seen what happened after the cameras were supposed to be off. "I won't go on record," the voice said through a burner app, "but I'll tell you this. Whatever Margot handed over, it's not the worst of it. There's more. Way more. Dahlia recorded everything. Cross-referenced details matched outfits to the footage released in screenshots. The pieces were forming a grim picture, but no one wanted to talk. Fear was thick, the kind that ended careers, or worse. She pressed the source again. Why did Margot come forward? A pause. Then, because she saw someone who couldn't say no. And it broke her. At the FBI, Agent Cole was now under pressure from multiple fronts. His superiors called him in. "This is becoming a political minefield," the assistant director said. "You're drawing heat we can't control. Senate oversight is watching. DOJ is asking questions. You need to proceed carefully." Cole remained expressionless. "We have probable cause. The footage is real. That doesn't mean it's admissible. We need to slow down. Or bury it?" The room went silent. The threat was clear. Bureaucracy had claws, but Cole had seen too much to back down. He returned to his office and began compiling everything into a secure report, backing up files on 3 separate encrypted drives. He trusted no one. That night, Margot sat by her window, scrolling through news on her phone. Her face looked foreign in the headlines, a symbol of courage to some, a traitor to others. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We know what you did. Stop now. While you still can." She showed it to Beth, who immediately called security. "You're not alone in this," Beth said, placing a hand on Margot's shoulder. "I feel like I am," Margot replied, voice distant. Somewhere across the city, Dahlia pressed send on a draft to her editor. Subject line, Hollywood's Hidden War. And in a quiet corridor of FBI headquarters, Agent Cole locked his office door, pulled out the flash drive again, and started the footage from the beginning. Because now he needed to see everything. The courthouse felt different that morning, heavier, tense, like something irreversible was about to unfold. The hearing was closed to the public. No cameras, no press, just lawyers, agents, and a judge with sharp eyes. Margot entered through a side entrance flanked by her legal team. She wore no makeup, no expression. In the hallway, she passed Damon Reyes, who gave her a look that lingered just long enough to send a message. He wasn't worried. Not yet. Inside the chamber, the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life. The footage began to play. Gasps echoed through the room within minutes. The camera showed more than anyone expected. Conversations that confirmed manipulation. Close-ups that revealed identities. A young woman crying, trying to leave, blocked by a man in a suit. Then the sound of a door locking. Agent Cole sat forward, noting reactions, watching how faces changed when certain names appeared on screen. Then came the shock. 2 prominent political figures, both guests, both interacting in ways that made the courtroom hold its breath. There was no way to spin it, no context that would clean it up. The silence that followed was the sound of reputations cracking. Damon Reyes stood abruptly. "This footage is inadmissible. No authentication. No proper chain of custody. We object to its use in any capacity." The judge didn't respond right away. Her eyes were still fixed on the screen, her knuckles white against the gavel. "We'll recess," she said quietly. Outside the chamber, panic had already begun to ripple. Someone leaked that a bombshell had dropped. Reporters scrambled for scraps. News vans were already rolling by the time Margot stepped into the sunlight. That afternoon, she took the stand. The room was smaller now. Just the judge, attorneys, and a stenographer. No audience. But the weight of it was greater than any stage she'd stood on. She spoke clearly, but her hands trembled. "I was invited to the event through a colleague. I didn't know what it was, not at first. It seemed like a typical party. Music, drinks, celebrities. But then things changed." She described what she saw, how the mood shifted after midnight, how doors began to close, how guests who resisted were ushered into silence, how she saw someone being pressured, recorded without consent, how the atmosphere turned predatory. "I didn't say anything for days. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head. Then I found the flash drive left behind. Someone must have dropped it. So I watched it and I knew. I couldn't pretend I didn't know anymore. Reyes tried to rattle her on cross-examination, but Margot didn't falter. She didn't name the young woman she saw. She didn't embellish. She simply told what happened as it happened. When it ended, the room sat in silence. The judge called another recess. Outside, protests doubled in size. But this time they weren't just chanting for or against Diddy. They were demanding justice, demanding truth. The footage hadn't gone public, but whispers of its contents had. And they were enough. Back at the FBI, Agent Cole received a memo. Internal Affairs was requesting a review of his conduct. The implication was clear. He'd pushed too hard, made too much noise. His superiors wanted to contain the damage, but he wasn't done. He walked into the evidence room and requested another copy of the drive. He reviewed every frame, documenting each timestamp, building a timeline too solid to ignore. He wouldn't let it vanish. And as the sun set over Los Angeles, Margot sat on her balcony, watching the sky shift from gold to black. She knew the hardest part wasn't giving the footage away. The hardest part was surviving everything that came after. The headline hit the world before dawn. Robbie's testimony shatters Hollywood's silence. Dahlia Moore's article dropped at 5:42 a.m. Within 10 minutes, it had been shared over 2 million times. The footage hadn't been made public, but the descriptions, the confirmations, and the testimony were enough. Her piece was meticulous, backed by legal documents, insider accounts, and timing that couldn't be disputed. By mid-morning, congressional leaders were calling for formal investigations. 2 members of the House Judiciary Committee issued public statements demanding transparency from both the entertainment industry and federal agencies. News anchors spoke of a reckoning. Online, survivors began sharing their own stories, some anonymous, some not. Margot turned off her phone. The noise had become unbearable. Her team had issued a single, careful statement. Ms. Robbie acted in accordance with her conscience and the law. She will not be granting interviews at this time. It wasn't enough to stop the flood, but it was enough to remind people she wasn't trying to sell a story. She was trying to survive one. Meanwhile, inside the FBI, Agent Cole sat before a special review committee. He spoke plainly, presenting his findings, his process, and the footage in question. "You were warned to stand down," one committee member said. "I was," Cole replied, "and you ignored it." "I followed the evidence." There was no punishment yet, but his reassignment came quickly. He was moved off the case, transferred to a less public division, given a different badge number. No explanation. No farewell. Just silence. But the files had already been duplicated, safely stored, circulated through the proper channels. What was coming couldn't be stopped now. Across the city, Diddy was taken into custody again, this time under a new set of charges stemming from unrelated financial misconduct uncovered during the broader investigation. It wasn't a conviction, but it was a blow. And more were coming. Damon Reyes resigned 2 days later. Rumors swirled that he had tried to negotiate immunity in exchange for internal records. Nothing was confirmed, but his departure sent a clear signal. The fortress was cracking from the inside. Margot moved temporarily to a private residence outside the city. No paparazzi, no press. Just quiet. She needed time, space. What she had done was right, but it had cost her peace, roles, and relationships. Still, she didn't regret it. In a letter to a close friend, she wrote, "This wasn't about being brave. It was about not being complicit. There's a difference. One's about courage, the other's about conscience. I just couldn't be quiet anymore." The industry began to shift. Studios quietly reassessed their relationships. Background checks became stricter. Former employees came forward. Attorneys launched civil suits. Public support for survivors surged. The silence that had once protected the powerful was no longer so impenetrable. Dahlia continued her work. Her next story focused on a lesser-known producer with ties to the same events. Another flash drive. Another witness. And through it all, Margot stayed quiet. Until one night, months later, she was spotted at a small independent film premiere, not as an actress, but as a producer, smiling, present, unbroken. Her presence drew a standing ovation. What she had handed over in a flash drive had done more than expose a scandal. It had triggered a movement. It had reminded people that silence isn't always neutral, and truth, though costly, is never wasted. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more real-world thrillers brought to life. And make sure to click the video on your screen now to continue watching the next chapter in this shocking Hollywood saga.